Hi guys, so I'm Inna for those of you who I haven't met before. Sorry, let me get back to my screen. So I work as a senior experience designer. I recently joined a pretty cool company called A11y. It's a full service consultancy focusing on design and technology. A bit of a shout out to those who are online actually watching me now. And to everyone else who has joined. Like Adam has said, we're trying this out for the first time. So, just bear with us because we are new to this as well. So just a bit about myself. I've been working in this industry for the last 10 years and super passionate about accessibility, inclusion and diversity. So it was a no-brainer for me to attend A11y Camp last year. It was my first one. So I'm not getting endorsed, I'm not getting paid to talk about it. I thought it genuinely was a really great conference and event. So the stuff that I will be talking about today, what is A11y Camp, the conference, a quick breakdown on accessibility, workshop and conference highlights, and an opportunity for question time at the end. So A11y Camp. It's been running for 5 years now. It's 4 days, 2 days conference with, I think it was around 32 people, 32 talks, and 2 days of workshops that you had an option of 5 in total to choose from. Around 200 plus people attended. The target audience is everyone from designers, BAU, developers, product owners and testers. And last year it was held in Sydney and they have been alternating it between Melbourne and Sydney. So, and it's organised by A11y Bytes and the speakers range from both international and national speakers, everyone from Facebook, governments, banks, Young Australians of the Year and United Nations. So, I thought it would be great if I can play you a highlight reel that's recently been created to highlight give you a bit of a taste of what it's like.
And speakers from A11y Camp 2019 at the International Convention.
Just before I continue, can everyone hear that? Just give me a thumbs up, someone.
Yep, we can definitely hear it. If someone wants to jump in on the comments and just confirm, that'd be great.
Sweet. Oh, damn it, no.
Assorted scenes and speakers from A11y Camp 2019 at the International Convention Centre in Sydney.
Welcome everyone to our 5th Accessibility Camp, or A11y Camp as it is known for short.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you.
It's so nice to be here. First of all, big shout out to everyone organising the event and also to our amazing interpreters.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here this afternoon.
Unquestionably, this is the highlight of my week.
I'm here to talk about the importance of your business being accessible.
I'm what I call an accidental model.
I am a 28-year-old autism advocate, mental health advocate, and video game advocate. Yes, that is right. I did say video games.
The general question when somebody says, look at this, my first reaction is, can I feel it? Can I hold it?
You don't know what you don't know.
The reason that we empathise with people is because it allows us to walk in their shoes.
Use your energy to energise others.
We must make sure that you have experts in sign language involved in the development.
If you find good components, then talk about them and share them.
Boom! I win the day. Accessibility.
Oh, shit. Sorry, guys. Oh, damn it.
Incredible things that you can just take inspiration.
I'm so
it is
sorry.
moving, the gap is widening, and we need to try and bring it back closer so that we can all have a sustainable, enjoyable and prosperous future.
Whole community of people who are doing incredible things that you can just take inspiration from.
All the things that we need to know to move towards inclusion and accessibility in the future.
How are we preparing to be thinking about accessibility, diversity and inclusion, not just within the product space, but how we market it out to the wider public as well?
Digital access is for everybody. Accessibility is not a niche market.
It's great to see people from other organisations that have implemented things around champions and programs in QA and dev to really sort of upskill people.
A11y Camp's been fantastic. One of the key messages for me is that strong importance of usability that everybody's mentioned.
And without further ado, I think we're done.
Thank you, Jing, and thank you for being part of the A11y Camp conference, because it's kind of you guys that make it all happen.
Thank you all very much. Hope you have safe travels.
Cool. Sorry about the other part where I accidentally stopped it. So before I get into every information that I was able to capture while I was doing the event and the conference, I can appreciate that we all come from different backgrounds with different levels of understanding about accessibility and inclusive design. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover off a few things just so that we're on the same playing field. So the conference is called A11y Camp, A11y, and what A11y stands for is accessibility. So it's the 11 letters that make up between A and Y. So why do we care about accessibility and who benefits? Well, everyone benefits. There's no such thing as a normal. In our life, we all have some level of impairment, whether it's permanent, temporary, or situational. And why should we make our products accessible? Well, because we can break it down into three things, and the first one I feel is the most important, and that is people. I won't read out all of them, but the ones that I do want to focus on is that 1 in 5 Australians have some form of disability, and 50.7% of Australians aged 65 years and over have a disability. Now that's quite high when you think about it. And if for whatever reason you don't think that people is an important part, or your business doesn't feel like it's an important part, then business is the next part. So people with disability have $54 million combined disposable income. People with disability are 3 times more likely to avoid an organisation. The community is small, and if even one person doesn't like your service, trust me, everyone else will know as well because of that. And it's important that we accommodate as many people as possible, and are twice as likely to disuse others from negative experiences. And like I mentioned before, Australian population is ageing, and 20% over 65 by 2030, which is quite high. And the third one is law. So the Australian Human Rights Commission have mentioned that any failure to provide full access to a web and other internet-based technologies for people with a disability may be seen as a violation of human rights. United Nations Convention of Human Rights of Persons with a Disability and the Australian Discrimination Act have also clearly outlined the services to the general public, including through the internet to provide information and services in accessibility and usable formats for persons and disability. A well-known and publicised example that people continue to refer to that some of you may be aware of is the Coles example that happened a few years ago when a woman with vision impairment wasn't able to complete her order online without the full support of a call centre. Coles have now gone to great lengths to make more accessible experiences, not only online, but in the physical world. Apart from what is currently happening with COVID-19 and them accommodating for the vulnerable by changing the timings of when people who are vulnerable are able to come to the supermarket. They have also have created what is called quiet hour. So for shoppers who have sensory sensitivity, they have allocated a day a week during a certain time period where they dim the lights to 50%, they turn off the radio so you don't hear background noise, and the volume on the scanners are reduced, along with additional support people to be on the floor to help out those who need it. Web content accessibility guidelines are also known as WCAG, and they'll probably in the subtitles call it Weekend. But they are guidelines published by the Web Accessibility Initiative as part of the World Wide Web. They are kind of dry, but these guidelines help us to ensure that what we create is accessible for people with disabilities and are used universally. And it follows 4 principles that provide the foundation for web accessibility. So across the 2 days, I had the option of choosing 5 different workshops that ran full days. The ones that I decided to focus on was research and writing. And as you can imagine, there's a lot that can be covered in these sessions. So what I'll do is I'll go through at a high level what I got out of these. And if you have any questions later, you're more than welcome to reach out or ask in the comments. So first workshop was usability testing and research with people with disability, run by Sarah and Andrew. This session was broken down into 3 sections. So the first part was understanding the different types of people who live with a disability, recruiting and preparing for user testing with people with disability. And then later we actually ran a session, the QA session, with 3 different people who have lived experience with a different disability. So like I mentioned, a lot was covered and it was very specific. However, there was one conversation that kept coming up during the day, and I think it's a really important thing to raise and to cover off. So what I'll do is I'll go straight into it. The language we use is important when describing someone who is living with a disability. I still find I catch myself out sometimes with how I refer to someone with a disability. So it was interesting to hear both from a perspective of people who have a disability and people who don't have a disability, and people who have a similar disability and how they actually refer to that. And we ran an exercise. So the first exercise was we got a list of what could be seen as inappropriate ways of explaining someone with a disability. So I'll get you to have a look at that first and maybe think about ways of how we could actually, what we could actually say that would be more appropriate. So a more respectful way to say the ones that are listed could be this way. So I'll get you to have a read through them. What the main objective of this exercise was not putting emphasis on the impairment, because a person is so much more than their impairment. They're a human first. And being mindful around how we use our language is really, really important. But if ever in doubt, just ask. It was quite evident, I think, at the end of our conversation that day, and even throughout the 4 days, is that everyone prefers a different way of being referred to. So there is there's no wrong to actually ask someone how they feel or what they would prefer. So the key takeaways when conducting research with people with disability: some are always better than none. It's so important to do research in general. To do research with people with a disability is even more important. Testing early and always, which could be applied to testing with anyone, and different types of users. The kind of breakdown that Sarah mentioned was being able to have someone from each group. So having someone from the deaf community, someone who has cognitive impairment, age and low vision. So if you're able to have 3 to 5 people within those groups, or at least one person from that group, again, some are always better than none. When it comes to the research planning, technology is really important. Understanding at the start whether or not you can have, whether or not you need assistive technology, or if someone else needs assistive, whether or not they can actually bring in their assistive technology. Be flexible and adaptive. If they need upfront information before coming in, provide it for them. If they can only go in after a certain amount of time because of traffic, because they find it challenging to be around people, accommodate for that. Incentives, this was an interesting one. An example that they gave us was they had, so different teams, different companies provide different types of incentives. And the example that they gave was when you provide someone with a gift card, and unfortunately, when you're providing someone with a gift card who, a person who has low vision, won't be able to use it, because a lot of the time the gift cards that are provided need assistance to actually scratch off the code at the back to be able to use it. So if you were to use the card by yourself, you would need another person to actually be able to help you out. So just being more mindful around what incentives you give and who you're giving it to and how they actually will be able to use it. Consent forms. This was a really great way to talk about. A lot of the times, consent forms are purely just text. But when you think about people who have cognitive challenges, they would benefit when the information is broken down with visuals along with text. And also a good one to consider for consent forms is that a lot of the time when you do consent forms, it's just a lot of information, but at the end you only allow a space for just a signature and a date. It would be great if people also included almost like a checklist of all the things that need to be ticked off. So having like bullet points to say, I'm comfortable taking videos, or I'm comfortable my information being used, and then signing it. So if they're not feeling comfortable, then you don't have to worry about it, because they can clearly see what they're actually signing. And physical access to the building. So if you're using your building, then being able to, set up everything at the start so that they feel comfortable when they get there and they have full instructions around getting physical access. Cool. So I'd like to share a video of what it looks like when accessibility is taken seriously and how much positive impact it can have not only on the people who are using the service, but also the internal teams. This is a case study done by Microsoft Xbox.
An inclusive design sprint case study, Xbox social gaming, with August de los Reyes.
As the design director for Xbox, we decided to focus on gamers, and particularly deaf and hard of hearing gamers.
Games are no longer just entertainment. They're a vital part of sort of society at large.
Giving an opportunity to share my experience with other people who are going to take this and hopefully turn this into something that's really useful for me and for other people who have my disability as well.
Accessibility is not the goal of inclusive design, but rather observing how people with different levels of ability navigate a typical situation and use that analog as a starting point for designing our features.
It really isn't about designing for people with disabilities. It's really just about a design process that meets everyone's needs.
Coming here and talking about Xbox, because that was the point of the discussion. It seems, however, the discussion was everything else outside of Xbox.
My favorite part so far has been the inclusion of the subject matter experts.
When you meet somebody in person, the empathy level grows. You hear their story, you feel their story in context of as them as a person in a way that you don't get in text on a forum or on a user voice.
Some of the inclusive design tools were really helpful to help me think about different slices of the experience.
We've got this basic idea that makes a lot of sense. We have it kind of frame by frame.
Thinking about on a bus.
What if, in fact, we transport that to another location? And so running that through a couple of different places, whether it be in transit.
Someone that has a different type of ability that is in a different context in their life.
Well, this is kind of an edge case, or this is only a couple of people who might benefit from this thing. In all actuality, it is a lot of people, and so there is kind of inherent value in those things as well.
The one thing that I would want to come out of this would just be a different way of approaching how you actually start the design process, rather than starting out in that tunnel development phase where you're just, generating this just for an Xbox One player, but just thinking outside of the box and make sure that it is inclusive to everyone.
And so I just really try to impress on the participants that, the things that they design are having a massive impact on the quality of life for thousands and thousands of people.
Back with the design director of Xbox.
Well, I'm super excited with the outcome of the sprint.
One of the projects that we came up with from the design sprint is basically including emojis in the virtual keyboard,
which allows deaf or hard of hearing players to understand the emotional context in which text-based communications are made.
So the virtual keyboard is something that appears system-wide, and this would be something that deaf gamers would be able to convey that certain level of emotion that they may not have been able to do beforehand.
One way that the inclusive design sprint really made a direct impact was thinking about how we expand the tags or sort of the standards that would govern these different clubs or these different parties. One of the features that we're talking about bringing to the console, the PC app, the mobile app this holiday season is actually something called the clubs. The idea is that, in this example, you're getting together with other deaf gamers. And this is just one particular example, but you could congregate around any sort of interest or common element that you might have with other people.
The bottom line around it is even though these social and emotional needs were specific to deaf gamers with the Xbox console, these are social needs that everyone experiences.
I think ideally, the more that we do these types of things, the more that people see us doing these types of things, the easier it will get. And I think it's already clear that Microsoft, as a culture, does value all humans.
Certainly them taking the lead, Microsoft, on accessibility for customers with disability, and them doing that as they have been is enormous.
We just can't afford to have things that are that important inaccessible to a huge percentage of the population.
A team works behind closed glass doors. The screen reads Inclusive, a Microsoft Design Toolkit. WDG Video.
Cool. And on day 2, the workshop that I did was designing and creating accessible content. So this is a good one for anyone who's a content writer, and it was run by Sarah and Lizzie. So the way we ran the session was we put together a journey map exercise, and then we went through individually to look at what needs to be considered from a content and accessibility point of view. Some people used their own examples, others just used a default one that we were playing around with. This is just a default one that we're playing around with. But what I really liked about this exercise is it really highlighted, like I've done a few journey mapping exercises before, but not so much from a content point of view, more from an experience point of view. And it really highlighted how nice the marriage between research, service design, and content is, and how it all needs to work, how it can work together, and how one helps the other. So yeah, I really liked that. 2 tools that I would 100% recommend downloading if you haven't already. Not downloading, one is downloading, the other isn't, is No Coffee plugin for Chrome. And it's the one on the left-hand side. And I know you probably won't be able to see the image, but basically it's a tool that you can use when you're on a browser. You can see what it looks like if someone who has a different type of vision low vision, or cataracts, or different types of conditions that you can have, and you can actually see what it looks like on the browser that you're on. And the other tool that we spoke about was readabilityguidelines.co.uk. And the way I can explain it is basically it's like a Wikipedia, but for content. And it's almost like a Bible for people who are content writers. So Sarah has created this along with Lizzie, and they've combined worldwide feedback from everyone to be able to compile this in the one location, so that they can actually go through looking at all different types of things that you would need to consider when it comes to content. So I'd highly recommend looking at that one. Key takeaways. So many people scan the page, and they shouldn't be reading the page. Let them get out of there as quickly as possible. A good exercise is to actually remove all the body copy from a page and see if it makes sense just with the headings. Providing alternative format, provide captioning and a transcript for videos for those who can't watch but can read. Be clear and concise. Generally, people just want to understand and not marvel at your language skills. I know sometimes we want to be quirky and funny, but yeah, it's straight to the point is usually the best way to go about it. And use language your users are using to explain yourself. Jargon, slang, idioms are difficult for anyone who doesn't know the terms, is reading because they've got a second language, and people with autism. You may have a lot of really funny and clever language, but consider that how many people you might be losing just because you want to be funny. And the last one, which I think is pretty funny, hashtags. A lot of people don't really think about how they use hashtags, but using title case to make it easier to read is really important. I don't know if many of you have seen this, and I really wish I was able to see it live in terms of seeing your reactions, but this was an example that was shown to us. So as you can see, it can be interpreted in many ways if you don't use title case properly. So, conference highlights. There were over 30 talks. I attended around half of them, so 17 or so of them. Similar to the workshops, a lot was covered in the 2 days. So I thought the best way to go about it is to highlight and map them out into groups for the topic. So some of the main themes that we're running: personal experiences living with a disability, education on tools, systems, and processes, embedded accessibility work in their organisations. So what I'll do is I'll go through each of these individually, and I'll share my notes that I actually took on the event, my sketch notes, and I'll go through some of the talks that really highlight these specific topics. So the first one, lived experience. I thought that Angel Dixon did a really amazing job. She was actually the keynote speaker for the event on the first day, and she highlighted the need to observe the world, not just the four corners of our screen when thinking about accessibility. The design of the environment is particularly important. Physical exclusion creates literal barriers and changes representation. It shapes who we think belongs and where. And one of the examples that she highlighted was the disability button that you see on most in most buildings. It's usually a separate door, and the way she framed it is that when you have a button that has a disability icon on it, it automatically implies that someone who needs a door opening is disabled. And it also makes assumptions that people who need to use this button can actually find it. A better solution is to have automatic doors, which benefit pretty much everyone, rather than, isolating one type of person with another type of person based on their temporary or situational experiences. The next one that I wanted to go over for lived experiences was done by Colin Allen. He is a former president of Deaf Australia, and this talk was actually done around the same time that the bushfires were running, right at the start. And he talked about how when the bushfires were happening, unfortunately, when people are on the news and telling you, this street is closed due to the fires, or be wary, this is a dangerous area. Unfortunately, there was no interpreters alongside the person who was speaking. So what would happen is they would have captioning instead. But because the streets names are so specific, that it didn't actually pick it up. So people, similar to our situation right now where we're using Google captioning, is that it doesn't pick it up correctly. And in situations like that, it can be deadly. It can be fun and games when we, listen, read the captionings that we have here, because they can be quite funny. But it's not actually harming anyone if it misinterprets certain words. Whereas in situations like that, it's really vital to make sure that that you have alternative ways of being able to communicate a message across, especially when it's so important. In saying that, it's also really important that that you take into consideration that you provide multiple options. So don't assume that someone can read. So if they if they can't read, then you provide someone who can sign, and don't assume that someone knows how to, just because that they have a hearing impairment, that they can sign. So, you know, provide an option to have captioning. Also, one of the things that they talked about was having people versus avatars. I know a lot of that, you know, I started learning Auslan, and it's a very expressive language, and using avatar just does not capture nearly the amount of expression that comes along with how you actually move your hands around. And use people in headshots rather than at the bottom. I've seen, even with all the COVID-19, like, you know, sometimes you actually see the interpreter right at the bottom in a small box, and you're assuming that someone has good vision to be able to see that. So just be mindful around how, you know, how we provide a service and an experience. The next one is tools. I thought this was a really clever way of going about it, and it's so unique to anything that I've seen before, and I really wanted to share it with you guys. So there were two girls who shared their experiences working at IBM, and they work with a guy called Randy who has low vision, and I think he was either low vision or blind. And basically, he's a developer, and the challenge that they experienced was that he wasn't able to provide feedback to them on their designs at the most appropriate time. So by the time the designs came through, it was too late for him to give any feedback, and he didn't really feel like he was part of the team. So what they had done is they just created their own internal project trying to, solve the problem. So they started researching on, you know, what tools are out there at the moment that could potentially help, and they found, like, you know, the 3D printers and raised line kits, and they just found that nothing currently in the market actually accommodated for what they wanted to do. So one of them had gone into a arts and crafts store and just started buying all different types of textured materials, and started putting together a physical textile material wireframe. And it progressed from, you know, hot glue guns and doing individual paperwork to actually having using magnets to put onto whiteboards so that you can move things around. So people could actually get into a room together, including Randy, and be able to provide feedback immediately at a very, you know, fast-paced, rather than having to only be able to provide feedback right at the end. So a photo that I took left to right is what they started off initially, and they found that because it took so long to actually create individual wireframes for each paper, they went down the path of the top right. You can see images. They created basically a legend with braille for each element, and were able to move it around. So Randy was able to provide more feedback. And the last one for tools was a really great link, a website that South Australia government have created. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I took a screenshot of what it looks like. So basically you can look at different types of teams, and I showed you an example of what a user experience could look like. So when you select user experience design, you can actually have, you know, be able to help if you don't know anything about assistive technology, for example, you can go into assistive technology and help yourself out through there. And, you know, you can also go through development and visual design and training and development. So I think it's a really great tool, and I'd highly recommend you trying that one out as well. And the last one was embedded accessibility within teams. And I think it really highlighted around, so Mel from Coles Group shared her experience around how an agile team would work. And it really highlighted how, if I'll go into more detail, that at the end of the day, it's not one person's responsibility and it's a team effort. And that at every stage of the process, you need to be able to embed accessibility into the process for it to actually work. And the last one for embedding accessibility was a guy called Matthew. He works as a QA at Facebook. And he shared how they have been able to QA at a scale similar to Coles. The theme of, it's not one person's job, it's a team effort. But what he highlighted was that you need to have a champion, and that champion needs to be a full-time champion of accessibility. It's not a part-time added to what you're currently doing, because at the end of the day, what will end up happening is, when your work starts to pile up, the first thing that will drop off is that. And if the company wants to take it seriously, then you need to take it seriously and actually have a team or an individual to champion that experience. So I know there's a lot on these sketch notes, so I will send a link to my sketch notes if you are interested and you do want to read through them at the meetup at the end. So what can we do? Well, bias, we all have them. Our environments and our experiences make us who we are, but we all have to be mindful about our biases. Majority of the time, we are not the user, and our responsibility is to make it as accessible as possible. Digital accessibility and inclusive design is a fairly straightforward concept. When you're making something, you want to ensure that it's accessed and interpreted by as many people as possible. It is also easy to slip into a mindset, however, of thinking that while accessibility is important, it's just something to tack on to the end of a project, or something that maybe you should include so it looks like you're trying to make an effort, just something to make sure that you don't have to, be in trouble for discriminatory. But last year at the A11y Camp, it really highlighted that, you're not meant to be getting a lollipop or a pat on the back, but rather that this is expected from businesses moving forward. To truly practice inclusive design, you need to consider all stages in a project. And A11y Camp really did a great job, because it not only helped you learn about different areas of teams and businesses and how they make their services and products more accessible, but it also allowed you to practice through the workshops that they ran. So before I finish, I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I think it's so important to, leave whatever you're doing in a better place than what when you saw it when you came in. Because at the end of the day, it's everyone's responsibility, and you can start now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Ina.